A town where you live, also known as in Japanese Kimi no Iru Machi. It is by far one of the biggest emotional roller coasters, at least for the first half of the series that I've written, not read in my entire life, having read over 40 romance mangas. It's insane. I have a lot to say, and also at the same time, I feel like half part of me just doesn't want to talk about this manga at all because it's part of me has been shocked by what I've read. I've finished all 261 chapters. It's been such a wild ride, but let's do our best today and dive right in. What we're gonna do is we're gonna break the manga down, what I liked, what I disliked, for the first half of the story. For the first half of this video without any spoilers, and then for the latter half of the video, we will introduce spoilers. So trigger alert, there are spoilers on the latter half of this video. You can see the timeline in the description as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and head right into it. So how I would describe this manga is, imagine you're on a roller coaster and the roller coaster goes off into a really nice start. It is an emotional, crazy roller coaster, up and down all the time. But then all of a sudden, when you go to the halfway point of this manga, imagine you're on that roller coaster and all of a sudden it just stops. Completely pauses. You're like, you and your partner just stop in there, the cart, like, what's going on? Why aren't we moving? It's not that fun anymore. Oh no, the roller coaster broke down. It's just all of a sudden really slow. And it just progresses really slowly, all of a sudden, like a traffic jam. And then finally, at the very end, there's another big roller coaster rush that just swings at you out of nowhere, completely unexpected after that slowness. And then finally it ends. This is what this manga is. That doesn't mean that I'm saying that this is terrible. There are a lot of positives and negatives I want to dig in, but let's cover this at least at a high level for the sake of this video and the time of this video. So let's begin first of all with the story. The story starts off strong. It executes strong. There's cliffhangers at every chapter, pretty much. Almost at the end of every chapter, there's a cliffhanger that will pull you into wanting to read the next chapter. I found myself staying up until like maybe 2 or 3 a.m. Some weeknights even, because I just kept wanting to read it. I'm usually, for me, if it's gonna be a high school setting, a romance drama, a rom-com, right? It has to be very compelling. The plot has to be creative and unique. The characters especially have to be very, very compelling. It has to be very, I'm drawn into these characters. I don't necessarily have to relate with these characters, but I can at least understand the motivations and the thoughts and suggestions of these characters. Like, they have to be somewhat at least mature. And I felt that this was actually, well, not bad at all. Like, it pulled me in. Now, up until a certain arc, what we and what the fans of this novel, I keep calling this a novel, what the fans of this manga call the Tokyo arc. It is by far the most polarizing arc, in my subjective opinion, and I'm sure perhaps the subjective opinions of the majority of the fan base, because this is where this is where the roller coaster truly kicks off. It's basically the first few arcs, the story is basically Haruto. He is a high school boy who grows up in the countryside in Hiroshima, and he has this group of friends, and all of a sudden this girl named Yuzuki, who moves in from Tokyo, decides to live with him, and all of a sudden his life goes into, like big wild ride. He has a crush on this girl in his school, but all of a sudden, because he starts living with Yuzuki, it gets complicated, stuff happens, he grows feelings, but I'm not gonna go past there. I promised you this would be a spoiler-free review. So let's just say that all of a sudden, our main character, Haruto, decides to move to Tokyo in this Tokyo arc. This starts at around, I don't remember what chapter this started around, but let's say, this is probably like the 1/3 or the first quarter of this chapter is based in Hiroshima. The second quarter of this chapter is based in Tokyo. This is when everything just went crazy. So I would say, going back to me rating the story part of this manga and during this review, the Tokyo arc for me was very, very compelling. A lot of this arc was frustrating. I felt like I was going through the entire spectrum of emotions. I was angry, I was pissed, I was sad, I was also happy and satisfied at times, mostly angry and frustrated. But at the end of the day, I can't deny I just kept wanting to read it to see what would happen next. I was frustrated. I wanted to know if things would get resolved, if something would be satisfying at least at the very end. I was not gonna go to sleep having read something that just frustrated me. So yeah, so that's my take of the Tokyo arc. And then finally, after that arc, this is where, going back to a roller coaster analogy, kind of just flattened a little bit. There's no more crazy up and downs. The amplitude kind of silenced a little bit. The plot dulled. It just turned into a slice of life / rom-com with bits and pieces of drama. But I would say there was not as much plot progression. There were elements, and there were plot elements that were introduced that related back to the actual main plot, but arguably kind of late at this stage. And at this point, I just felt like I didn't necessarily just wanted the mangaka, to really finish the manga completely, like expedite it. But I did want something to happen. I didn't want just pure slice of life comedy, and like for a lot of the times. But that's kind of what we kind of got. And then near the end, this another stupid thing happens where I'm not gonna say anything for this first half, but I didn't think this was from a common sense standpoint. I don't think this was executed well. But fully at the very end, we're talking the last chapter. It was fine. I would have thrown my laptop out the window if the ending was not satisfying, to say the least. It was. There is just a lot of open-ended questions I just am frustrated about because they were never answered, both about the characters, the various different characters throughout the story, as well as certain open ends of the plot. We have the main plot, and then we have kind of, side progressions where there's streams of plot somewhat related back to the main plot, or kind of diving siloed away from it that were just not closed properly, which is fine. I mean, at the end of the day, this comes with the territory. This manga was 261 chapters on the whole, and it was very long. There's multiple arcs. Of course, there's going to be a lot of stuff that you have to prioritize and focus on over the others. I just wish the execution of it was a little bit better overall, but at the end of the day, it is what it is, right? So now going to the art and the characters, I'm going to quickly cover the art first. There's not going to be a lot for me to talk about besides it was very good. I highly enjoyed the art. I would have not been able to very much, enjoy the emotional frustration and the happiness I got from reading the story and the characters if it wasn't for the amazing art that complemented pretty much everything. The art pretty much was tailored for every character that had their unique personalities, which is amazing. And also the panels, like the facial expressions of the characters, especially when there was something happening, there was something emotional happening going on, was very well depicted through the art. I thought, so the mangaka Seo Sensei, I thought he did really well in depicting the characters, especially the close-ups. It just makes you feel immersed in the entire story, and it made you probably almost want, you're empathetic towards whatever a character is feeling. So yeah, 100% props to that. I give art a 9, and I give the story a 7 out of 10. Yeah, so let's keep going on. So for the characters, I give the characters a 7, and here's why. Relating back to what I talked about during the story element, the problem was there's so many characters that Seo Sensei or the mangaka introduces, and some of them don't get a full closed ending, which is okay. There's just too many characters, that's fine. One thing I was troubled about was just not being able to get into that character's head enough, deep enough to fully understand a motive or a purpose that they were trying to accomplish. This is especially true for Yuzuki, the main female MC of this manga, especially during that Tokyo arc, which I will dig into in the latter half. Yeah, it was, for me, I just feel like, the planned plot was great. The characters, however, I felt like I truly did not understand them enough, leaving me frustrated at them. And having, disingenuous emotions towards these characters because perhaps I was assuming something that these characters were going through otherwise. And this is the cause of maybe not being able to dig deep enough into this character's brain to what their true intentions were. Why did they do X? And not being able to know that led me to kind of make my own assumptions, as well as perhaps the rest of the fan base. And it kind of went from there. So yeah, characters as 7, but they do go through character growth. There is character progression. There is character development, especially for the first half of the manga. The latter half, questionable. There are certain arcs in the latter half that, there's spurts of character growth over others. But you do notice it overall. I'm not going to give this lower than a 7. Finally, the overall enjoyment. This was an 8 out of 10. I wanted to give this a 7 because of how frustrated I was reading this manga from beginning, or not beginning, but I would say halfway to the end. But overall, if you think about it in retrospect, I would never give a manga that I wasn't so pulled in and emotionally invested in, no matter whether I was feeling frustrated towards it or not. Anything lower than an 8, because of the fact that it had me pulled in. It had me emotionally invested and wants, it's forced me to make this video because there's so much I want to talk about. There's nothing more I can say to this. It's like a love-hate relationship with this whole plot and the story and everything that has of it within. So yeah, that's what I want to say. And now let's dig into finally the spoilers part. I'm not going to use the same structure and dig into the story, art, and characters as I did prior. Instead, I'm just going to ramble on and talk about the various spoilers and the various areas that particularly most of the fan base probably want to talk about and have questions upon. So let's dive in with area number 1 I want to talk about, and that is the Tokyo arc. I know I've probably spent a solid few minutes talking about the Tokyo arc, but going back to this, first of all, Haruto, kind of giving some background, decides to chase after Yuzuki after Yuzuki basically quote-unquote dumps him. And this is a dump. She ghosts him for 3 weeks. They were texting, they were doing a long-distance relationship. Yuzuki and Haruto were living together in Hiroshima, but then Yuzuki decided to leave for Tokyo again because she amends her relationships with her parents and her family, which is a stepmother and stepsisters and a real paternal father. And, this is fine. I felt like, she amended her relationship. I understand this. Haruto helped her in doing so. She must have a lot of, I would say thankfulness for Haruto having helped her and all that stuff. They lived together for like, what, a year? So there are feelings, and they started dating. And, she was at near the end of the Hiroshima arc, she was, you can read it itself, she was a little bit hesitant as well in dating Haruto, even though she was the first one who declared that she had feelings for him. At first I was confused. I was like, why are you hesitant? Is it because Haruto had feelings with a crush beforehand, but then Haruto realized he had feelings for her instead, and you felt jealous, or you felt like he was just faking it? But no, this is when the plot twist completely hits me in the head. When Haruto decides to chase after Yuzuki, because this was a long distance relationship, and all of a sudden Yuzuki dumps him. It's been 3 weeks, no text. He decides to chase after her to fully understand what's going on. And the biggest plot twist imaginable, at least I didn't think this would happen 20 chapters prior, but as more as we kind of built up towards this moment, I'll refer to him as Kyousuke. The reveal of who Kyousuke and his relationship with Yuzuki were, I had kind of this image, like I kind of wanted to predict this, a few chapters prior. I wouldn't say I was calling for this way earlier than that though. So it did kind of throw me off a little bit. And obviously it made me very emotional because there's all of a sudden with this plot twists, with any plot twists in this story, right? Whether it's a manga or it's a written story, there comes a lot of open-ended questions. And these open-ended questions, fair to say, you can, readers can take their time going through and answering them through the writings of a plot. However, you do not, in fact, want to leave the reader hanging too deeply into, the darkness of a void without fully understanding why a character did something. And for my sake, and for perhaps the fanbase sake, why Yuzuki decided to stick with Kyousuke instead of Haruto. From what I read during this arc, they were friends. They were very, very good friends during middle school. Kyousuke was chasing after Yuzuki, and he constantly got rejected by her. But then eventually, as what I've assumed, is Yuzuki started gaining some feelings for Kyousuke. But then she moves to Hiroshima, falls in love with Haruto, our main male MC, which we've been following as readers since day one of this manga. So obviously we're going to be more emotionally attached and supportive of Haruto. From his perspective, all of a sudden this happens. He gets dumped by Yuzuki for Kyousuke, a guy who she constantly rejected. So we're asking, why does she even have feelings if this is happening? And then it gets revealed that this Kyousuke guy is suffering from a cancer that's going to kill him within a year. And then you ask yourself, wow, so are we just going to assume that this is a pity death? So she's dating Kyousuke out of pity here because he's going to die. And he dumped Haruto by, I think this is coming from, a realistic standpoint of how breakups should work. No one should just be left ghosted, right? Especially if Haruto chases Yuzuki to Tokyo. Haruto deserves more than just what Yuzuki brought to him in terms of the explanation. Because first of all, it's been 3 weeks, and all of a sudden, up until this point of the revelation, it's probably been months, right? So I felt like from a guy's perspective, Haruto deserved a little bit more of an explanation. And this explanation was just never provided. Throughout the entire core of this manga, there's just nothing. I think eventually, readers were able to put pieces together. There were a few flashbacks later down the road, later in the other arcs, showing Yuzuki's build-up in her relationship with Kyousuke. But in my opinion, that was a little bit too little too late. Everything should have been answered during this arc. So yeah, that's my complaint here. Anyways, rambling aside, if we go to some of the other areas, like for example, when Yuzuki, so I feel this is the part where I actually liked. I really love this manga in that Yuzuki proposes to Haruto to never see each other ever again. She's guilty after Kyousuke dies. Kyousuke was Haruto's very good friend. If you read the manga, you'll understand why they're great friends and why Haruto still liked Kyousuke a lot, despite Kyousuke kind of having stolen Yuzuki away from him. Honestly, from my perspective, there's absolutely no hate Kyousuke should have. It is all on Yuzuki to explain herself, in my opinion at least. And instead of any of those explanations, she, out of guilt, proposes just never see each other ever again. That's fine. Let Haruto live his life. We're, as readers, we're following his his perspective anyways throughout the story. So going forward, he starts dating another person that he met also in the same high school. Her name's Asuka. Everyone loves her. She is by far one of the best well-written characters in this entire story. There's nothing bad I can say about her. Absolutely nothing. There are so many faults in all of these characters, especially the main cast, that I can dig into. But for Asuka, there's just nothing from the top of my mind that I can really talk about. There's just nothing. Everyone loves her. I think she deserved way more, both screen time and just, being treated well from our main cast. So anyways, I'm happy that, they have a relationship for about like a year or over a year or so. And then all of a sudden, boom, Yuzuki returns. This is first year college all of a sudden. Everyone's, graduated. So now I'm happy because we're out of that high school setting. We're actually into college life. I'm 23, so I'd prefer to read more seinen kind of stuff, more mature stuff that I can perhaps relate to more. And this is where I got kind of excited. And all of a sudden, Yuzuki starts growing her feelings back for Haruto. She sees him more often than not all of a sudden, after suddenly appearing. And, I think this is, from a real life standpoint, this is well written because it's somewhat realistic. It's realistic to think that cheating does happen. It's realistic to think that feelings don't last forever. It's realistic to think that love does not last forever either in a relationship, no matter what happens near the beginning. So I think the story behind this entire manga actually depicts those themes pretty well. It's a trope by itself. And I thought that, well, honestly, besides Yuzuki and Haruto's relationship, which I, maybe we can save another video for that because there's a lot we can talk about for that. But for the sake of this, they meet together. Yuzuki realizes she still loves Haruto. This is fine, but we need an explanation. Why does she love Haruto, but then went through the whole process of dumping him? And you know what? Like, I'm not angry at the dump. I'm angry at the no explanation. I'm angry at the kind of no explanation that this guy Kyousuke existed in her life. I'm angry at the no explanation that this guy Kyousuke was the reason why she left, and she lacked the explanation for Haruto when she left. And then I'm angry at the explanation that she decides to leave out of guilt, but then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes back with these feelings, but then doesn't explain these feelings properly and how she felt at the time she left out of guilt. I know it's a person's death. I know Kyousuke died and it caused grief and it caused an immense emotional suffering, but at the same time, we need explanations. I just felt like I wasn't digging into these characters' heads enough to really fully understand, so I was making my own assumptions. They start, and then this is when Asuka gets just mistreated a little bit. Haruto decides to leave her for Yuzuki. It was inevitable. Yuzuki's literally on the cover page of this manga. You knew who this guy was going to end up with near the end. I felt bad because this is very realistic and kind of, in everyday life, in a lot of relationships. Feelings go from one person to another, and all of a sudden one person is hurt, but you just can't do anything about it. Only time will heal these types of wounds, and someone will get hurt, and sacrifices for love have to be made. That is a significant trope that has been very well written in this manga by Seo Sensei, so very big props. And Asuka does kind of, her character never wavers. Everyone still loves her up until the very end of this manga anyway, so we can leave it at that. But anyway, so Haruto and Yuzuki start living together, and that's fine, and then this is when we start digging into very slice of life and rom-com based stuff. Like, you see their everyday lives, you see what their struggles, their stresses, you see their emotional struggles, you see sometimes they talk to each other about the past, about Kyousuke, but just not enough. Why are you guys keeping quiet for so long about this guy? Why is there no explanation? Why does Haruto not ask for more explanations? I want, like, from his shoes, if I were in his shoes, I would be slightly insecure. Because mainly, not because obviously this guy is dead and Yuzuki perhaps loved this guy that was dead now, but I would be insecure because Yuzuki came back without much explanation besides, oh, I've loved you ever since we left. I've tried to forget you, but I still loved you. Where did this love spawn from, and why wasn't this love strong enough to keep her away from Haruto when she left for Kyousuke? These are the questions that I just want a deeper meaning behind. So anyways, we get through this whole rom-com slice of life plot up until they graduate. Haruto has to move out because he found a job that's way further away in this place called Kochi, I think. So they try to do long distance, and this is my second immense, almost as frustrating as the Yuzuki stuff. But Haruto, near this, like the third or fourth last chapters, decides to break up with Yuzuki just simply because they can't make this long distance work. Now, realistically, he might make a point. Long distance relationships usually don't last that very well. There's a lot of struggles behind it. These guys barely lasted like a few months while doing this. Like, come on. You're trying to see each other like every weekend, and one weekend you can't see each other, boom, decide to break up with her. To me, that just makes no sense. Why don't you try harder if you truly liked her? Why doesn't Seo Sensei have more creative ways to be able to keep these characters together for the sake of our hearts as readers, and just for the satisfying portion of this ending that we desire as readers? So they break up. All of a sudden, like a year and a half pass by, and Haruto gets transported to Tokyo. Like, he gets transferred to Tokyo by his company after becoming a bigger shot in his company. And then he finds Yuzuki again, and then they live happily ever after. And this is just the portion that I just absolutely does not make sense to me. This whole breaking up and then getting back together because of the long distance could have happened, but the execution of it has to be better. I think at this point, the mangaka wanted to kind of just end, was very in a hurry to end this manga. I think he was moving on to a new manga anyways. I think it's called Fuka at the time. But anyways, yeah, it's the very end of it is just very unnecessary and somewhat even cliche, given how fast it went through. I can't get started about how frustrated I was with those last few chapters. The very last chapter is fine. The few chapters preceding that were not fine by me. But that's just my subjective opinion about it. Overall, I would give this manga a solid 8 out of 10, despite all the complaining I've done, simply because it just had me pulled in. It's a very memorable manga. It won't leave my head for a long time. I can dig into the details for a long time, and I know it. Let me know what your thoughts are again, and I will see you again soon. Bye.